The dust from the departing train hadn't even settled when Kade Weston noticed her sitting on the worn wooden bench outside the Loveland station, her shoulders hunched forward and her fingers gripping an empty carpet bag like it was the last thing tethering her to this earth. It was September of 1882, and the Colorado afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small railroad town, making the air shimmer above the tracks as if the whole world was melting at its edges. Kade had come into town to pick up supplies for his ranch, but something about the way this young woman sat there, perfectly still except for the slight tremor in her hands, made him pause beside his wagon instead of heading straight to the general store like he'd planned. She had dark auburn hair that had started to escape from its pins, and her dress, though obviously well made once, was covered in the kind of dust that came from days of travel. Her face was turned slightly away from him, but he could see the paleness of her cheek, the tight set of her jaw. She looked like she was trying very hard not to cry. And Kade, who had lost his own parents to cholera 5 years ago, and knew what it was like to feel completely alone in the world, felt something shift in his chest. He approached slowly, removing his hat as he did so. "Excuse me, miss," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "Are you waiting for someone?" She turned to look at him then, and he saw that her eyes were a striking shade of green, though they were red-rimmed and exhausted. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, he figured, maybe a year or two younger than his own 25 years. For a moment she just stared at him, and he wondered if she was going to answer at all. Then she seemed to make some kind of decision, her spine straightening just slightly. "No," she said, and her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying or hadn't had water in too long. "I'm not waiting for anyone." Kade glanced down at the empty bag in her lap, then back at her face. "Did someone steal from you?" A bitter smile crossed her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "No, I left it all behind." She paused, then added, as if she owed him some explanation. "I got on the train in Philadelphia 3 days ago. By the time I reached Chicago, I'd sold my jewelry to pay for the rest of the ticket. By Kansas City, I'd traded my mother's silver hairbrush for food. This morning in Denver, I gave away my last decent pair of shoes to a woman with children who needed them more than I did." She looked down at her feet, which were clad in worn boots that were clearly too big for her. These were hers in exchange, but they're falling apart. "Why Loveland?" Kade asked, genuinely curious. It wasn't a destination most people chose deliberately. It was a small ranching town, peaceful enough, but not the kind of place that drew newcomers unless they had family here. She shrugged, and the gesture looked like it took all her remaining energy. "The conductor said it was a good town, that people here were decent. I had just enough money left for a ticket this far, so I got off." She met his eyes again, and there was a defiant tilt to her chin, despite the tears threatening to spill over. "I suppose I'll find work somewhere. I can sew and I can read and write. Surely someone needs help with something." Kade felt that shift in his chest again, stronger this time. He'd been running his ranch alone for 3 years now, ever since his parents died, and his younger sister married and moved to Wyoming with her husband. The house was too big, too empty, and he'd been thinking lately that he needed to hire someone to help with the cooking and the mending, all the things he'd been neglecting because he spent every daylight hour working the cattle and maintaining the property. But more than that, something about this woman's courage, the way she held herself together, despite clearly being at the end of her rope, made him want to help her. "I have a ranch about 5 miles west of here," he said. "It's nothing fancy, but it's a working cattle operation. The house has 3 bedrooms, and I've been living there by myself for a while now. I could use someone to help with the household work, the cooking and such. You'd have your own room, of course, and I'd pay you a fair wage, room and board plus $20 a month to start." She stared at him like he'd just offered her the moon. "You don't even know my name." "I'm Kade Weston," he said, extending his hand. "And you're right, I don't. But I know desperation when I see it, and I know what it's like to need help and not know where to find it. My parents taught me to be a good neighbor, and even if you're new to Loveland, that makes you a neighbor as far as I'm concerned." Her hand was trembling when she placed it in his, but her grip was firm. "Prudence Harper," she said, "though most people call me Prue. It's nice to meet you, Miss Harper. So what do you say? I promise I'm not some kind of criminal or lunatic. You can ask anyone in town about me. I've lived here my whole life, and my family has a good name." Prue looked back at the train station, then down at her empty bag, then finally back at Kade's face. He had kind eyes, she thought, dark brown and honest. His face was tanned from working outdoors, and he had the solid build of a man who did hard physical labor every day. There was something steady about him, something that made her want to trust him, even though every sensible part of her brain was screaming that this was crazy, that she shouldn't go off with a strange man to his isolated ranch. But what choice did she have, really? She had no money, no possessions except the clothes on her back and this useless empty bag. She could try to find work in town, but she'd seen how small Loveland was when the train pulled in. There was a general store, a saloon, a church, and not much else. If she stayed at the station much longer, she'd probably be sleeping on this bench tonight, and who knew what might happen to a woman alone in the dark. "All right," she said finally. "I'll come work for you, but I want to be clear that this is an employment arrangement. I'm not looking for anything else." Kade nodded seriously. "Understood completely. You'll be my employee, nothing more. You have my word on that." He helped her into the wagon, and she noticed that his hands were calloused but gentle, that he didn't try to hold on to her longer than necessary. Her bag went onto the wagon bed, even though it was empty, and then he was climbing up beside her and taking the reins. The horses started forward with a gentle encouragement, and Loveland's small collection of buildings began to fall away behind them. The land opened up around them as they traveled west, rolling hills covered in prairie grass that had turned golden in the late summer heat. In the distance, Prue could see mountains rising up, their peaks still holding snow despite the warmth of the season. It was beautiful in a stark, lonely way that was completely different from Philadelphia's crowded streets and tall buildings. She'd grown up in the city, spent her whole life there until 3 days ago, and this vast openness was both terrifying and somehow liberating. "It's very empty out here," she said after a while, just to break the silence. Kade glanced at her with a small smile. "I suppose it is compared to a city. But once you get used to it, you start to see it's not empty at all. There's plenty of life out here if you know where to look. Do you have neighbors nearby?" "The closest ranch belongs to the Carmichael family, about 8 miles north. Good people. Tom Carmichael and I help each other out during branding season and roundups. His wife Martha is a fine woman, real welcoming. I'll introduce you once you're settled. She'll probably be happy to have another woman relatively close by." Prue nodded, trying to imagine what her life was going to be like out here. "What exactly would you need me to do? You mentioned cooking and mending." "That mainly," Kade said. "I'm not much of a cook myself. I can manage bacon and beans, but that's about it. The house needs cleaning regularly, and I've got about 3 months' worth of mending piled up that I keep meaning to get to. If you know anything about gardening, there's a vegetable plot behind the house that my mother used to keep. It's been neglected since she passed, but the soil is still good. You'd be welcome to work on that if you wanted to." "I can do all of those things," Prue said. She'd helped her mother with all the household tasks growing up, at least until her mother died when Prue was 17. After that, it had been just her and her father, and she'd managed their home while he worked as a banker. The memory of her father sent a sharp pain through her chest, and she forced herself to think about something else. Kade seemed to sense her distress because he started pointing out landmarks as they traveled, telling her about the land in the area. He showed her where a creek ran through his property, where the best grazing land was, where he'd seen a black bear and her cubs last spring. His voice was calming, and Prue found herself relaxing slightly despite everything. "Can I ask why you left Philadelphia?" Kade said eventually, his tone careful. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to. I don't mean to pry." Prue was quiet for a moment, debating how much to tell him. But he'd been kind to her, and he was giving her a chance when she desperately needed one. He deserved at least some explanation. "My father died 2 months ago," she said, keeping her voice as steady as she could. "Heart failure. He was only 49. After he passed, I discovered that he'd made some very poor investments in the years before his death. He'd hidden it from me, I suppose trying to protect me from worrying. But when he died, the debts came due. We lost our house, everything in it. I had a little money from selling some personal items, but not much." "I'm sorry," Kade said quietly. "That must have been terrible." "It was," Prue admitted. "But that wasn't the worst part. My father had arranged for me to marry a business associate of his, a man named Gerald Thornton. The wedding was supposed to be this October. After my father died, Mr. Thornton said he still wanted to go through with the marriage. He said he'd take care of me, pay off my father's debts." "But you didn't want to marry him," Kade guessed. "He's 53 years old and has been married twice before. Both wives died under suspicious circumstances, though nothing was ever proven. He drinks heavily, and I've seen how he treats his servants. The thought of being bound to him for the rest of my life was unbearable. She wrapped her arms around herself. So 3 days ago, I packed what I could carry and left. I knew he'd come looking for me if I stayed anywhere on the East Coast. I'd heard people talk about the West, about how it's possible to start over out here. So I bought a train ticket going as far as my money would take me, and here I am. Kade was quiet for a long moment, and Prue wondered if he thought she was foolish or reckless. But when he spoke, his voice was filled with something that sounded like respect. "That took a lot of courage," he said. "Leaving everything you knew, traveling all that way alone. Most people would have just accepted their fate." "Maybe I should have," Prue said. "Maybe I'm just a coward running away from my responsibilities." "No," Kade said firmly. "You're not a coward. A coward would have married that man even knowing what kind of person he was, just because it was easier than choosing an uncertain future. What you did was brave." Prue felt tears prick at her eyes again, but this time they were different tears. It had been so long since anyone had said anything kind to her, since anyone had made her feel like she wasn't completely alone. "Thank you," she whispered. They rode in companionable silence for a while after that. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Eventually, Kade guided the horses off the main road, onto a smaller track that wound through the grassland. After another mile or so, Prue saw buildings ahead, a house and several outbuildings arranged around a central yard. The house was larger than she'd expected, a solid 2-story structure made of wood that had weathered to a silvery gray. It had a wide front porch with a rocking chair sitting empty, and windows that gleamed in the fading light. The barn was well maintained, and she could see a corral where several horses stood watching their approach with mild interest. There were other structures too, what looked like a chicken coop and a smokehouse, and a few other buildings she couldn't immediately identify. "This is it," Kade said, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "It's not much, but it's home." "It's lovely," Prue said honestly. There was something welcoming about the place despite its isolation, something that spoke of care and attention. Kade helped her down from the wagon, and she followed him up the porch steps. The front door wasn't locked, and when he pushed it open and gestured for her to enter, she stepped into a wide front room that served as the main living area. There was a stone fireplace on one wall, a worn but comfortable-looking sofa, and 2 chairs arranged near it. A dining table sat near the back of the room, and she could see a doorway that presumably led to the kitchen. "Your room would be upstairs," Kade said, leading her to a staircase on the right side of the room. "There are 3 bedrooms up there. Mine is at the front of the house. The back 2 were my parents' room and my sister's room. You can take whichever one you'd prefer." Upstairs, Prue looked into both rooms. The one that had belonged to Kade's parents was larger, with a double bed and a wardrobe and a small writing desk by the window. His sister's room was smaller, but felt cozier somehow, with a single bed covered in a faded quilt and a dresser that had been painted white. She chose the smaller room without hesitation. "This one," she said. "If that's all right?" "Of course," Kade said. "Whatever you prefer. I'll bring you some water so you can wash up, and I'll see about making some supper. Nothing fancy, I'm afraid." "I can cook," Prue said quickly. "I mean, that's what you're paying me for, isn't it? Let me earn my keep." Kade smiled, and she noticed for the first time that he had a nice smile, the kind that reached his eyes and made small crinkles form at the corners. "You just got here after 3 days on a train. You must be exhausted. How about we compromise? I'll help you tonight. Show you where everything is in the kitchen, and starting tomorrow, you can take over the cooking." That seemed fair, so Prue agreed. After washing her face and hands in the basin of water, Kade brought up to her room. She joined him downstairs in the kitchen. It was a good-sized space with a large cast-iron stove, a deep sink with a hand pump, and shelves lined with dishes and cooking supplies. Kade showed her where he kept the food stores, the root cellar where vegetables and preserves were kept cool, the smokehouse where he hung meat to cure. Together they made a simple meal of fried potatoes, bacon, and canned beans. It wasn't fancy, but Prue discovered she was ravenous. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a proper meal. They sat at the dining table to eat, and conversation came easier now. Kade told her more about the ranch, about the cattle operation he ran, with the help of 2 ranch hands who came by several times a week. "You'll meet them soon enough," he said. "Jake Peterson and his son, Eli. They're good men, hard workers. They have their own small place about 10 miles east. but they help me out regularly, especially during busy seasons. I help them in return when they need it. Is ranching very difficult? Prue asked. She knew nothing about it, had never even seen a cow up close before today. It can be, Kade admitted. There's always something that needs doing. Fences to mend, cattle to move, water sources to maintain. The weather can be harsh, especially in winter. But it's honest work, and there's something satisfying about it. My father built this place from nothing, and I'm proud to keep it going. After dinner, Prue insisted on washing the dishes despite Kade's protests. It felt good to have something useful to do, something normal and domestic after the chaos of the past few months. Kade dried the dishes as she washed them, and they worked in comfortable silence. I'll show you the rest of the property tomorrow, Kade said as they finished. You should probably get some rest tonight. I imagine you're worn out. He was right. Now that she'd eaten and was warm and safe, Prue felt exhaustion creeping through her bones. Thank you, she said, for everything. For giving me a chance when you had no reason to. Everyone deserves a chance, Kade said simply. Sleep well, Miss Harper. Please, call me Prue, she said. If we're going to be living under the same roof, we should probably use first names. All right then, Prue, and you should call me Kade. Upstairs in her new room, Prue changed into the only other dress she owned, which would have to serve as a nightgown until she could make herself some proper sleepwear. The bed was comfortable, the quilt soft and clean-smelling. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, more stars than she'd ever seen in Philadelphia, where the city lights drowned them out. She should have been terrified, she thought. She was alone in a strange place with a man she'd met only hours ago. No way to leave or call for help if something went wrong. But instead of fear, what she felt was something closer to hope. Kade seemed like a good man, the kind of person her mother would have called decent and true. Maybe this was the fresh start she'd been hoping for. Maybe she could build a new life here in Colorado, far away from Gerald Thornton and the ruins of her old existence. Sleep came easier than it had in months. Prue woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of someone moving around downstairs. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then memory flooded back. The train station, Kade's offer, her new room in this house in the middle of the Colorado grassland. She dressed quickly in her only other dress, which was slightly less travel-stained than the one she'd worn yesterday, and pinned up her hair as best she could without a proper mirror. Downstairs, she found Kade in the kitchen, attempting to make coffee. He looked up when she entered and gave her a sheepish grin. Morning. I was trying to let you sleep in, but I'm afraid I'm not very quiet in the mornings. I'm usually an early riser, Prue said. What time is it? About 6. The ranch hands will be here around 7. I usually try to have breakfast ready for them when they arrive, but like I said, my cooking skills are limited. Let me, Prue said, moving toward the stove. What do you usually make? Eggs, bacon, biscuits if I'm feeling ambitious, which isn't often, so usually just eggs and bacon. Prue assessed the available ingredients and got to work. She was a good cook, had learned from her mother, and then perfected her skills over the years of managing her father's household. Within an hour, she had a full breakfast prepared, including fluffy biscuits, scrambled eggs with fresh chives from the garden, bacon fried crispy, and a pot of strong coffee. Kade watched her work with obvious appreciation. I think hiring you might be the best decision I've made in years, he said as he set the table. The ranch hands arrived just as the food was ready. Jake Peterson was a weathered man in his 50s with a graying beard and sharp blue eyes that assessed Prue carefully. His son Eli was around her age, maybe a year or two older, tall and lanky, with his father's blue eyes and a shy smile. Jake, Eli, this is Prue Harper, Kade said, making introductions. She's going to be helping out around here with the household work. Prue, these are my neighbors and friends. Pleased to meet you, Prue said, shaking their hands. Jake's handshake was firm and brief, but Eli held on just a moment longer than necessary, his smile widening. The pleasure's all mine, Miss Harper, Eli said. It's real nice to have another young person around here. Gets lonely sometimes with just us old folks. I'm 25, Kade said dryly. Hardly old. Speak for yourself, Jake said, but there was humor in his voice. He turned to Prue. My boy's got a point, though. We don't get many newcomers out this way. What brings you to Loveland? Prue gave them the abbreviated version of her story, leaving out the darkest details about Gerald Thornton. Both men listened with sympathetic expressions. And when she finished, Jake nodded approvingly. Well, you've come to the right place. Kade here's a good man, and this is a good town. People look out for each other here. He glanced at the food spread out on the table. And if you cook like this every day, you'll fit right in. Breakfast was a lively affair, with the three men discussing the work that needed to be done that day. They were planning to move part of the herd to a different grazing area, which apparently would take most of the day. Prue listened and learned, starting to understand the rhythm of ranch life. After the men headed out, Prue spent the morning exploring the house more thoroughly. It was clear that Kade had been trying to keep things clean, but there was dust in the corners and the windows needed washing. The mending pile he'd mentioned turned out to be a large basket full of shirts with missing buttons, trousers with torn seams, and socks that needed darning. She set up a work area in the living room near the window for good light and got started. By noon, she'd mended 3 shirts and darned 4 pairs of socks. She made sandwiches for lunch, and when the men came back to the house for their midday meal, they ate quickly before heading back out to finish their work. The days began to take on a pattern. Prue would wake early, make breakfast for everyone, and then spend her days cooking, cleaning, mending, and gradually making the house feel more like a home. She started working on the neglected vegetable garden, pulling weeds and preparing the soil for a late planting of some cool weather crops. Kade had been right that his mother had chosen the location well. The soil was rich and dark, and there were still some herbs struggling to survive that had self-seeded from previous years. In the evenings after the ranch hands had gone home and the work was done, Prue and Kade would often sit on the front porch watching the sun set over the mountains. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from the practical to the philosophical. Kade told her about growing up on the ranch, about his parents and his sister. Prue shared carefully edited memories of her childhood in Philadelphia, the good times before her mother died. A week passed, then 2. Prue found herself settling into this new life with surprising ease. The loneliness of the prairie that had initially frightened her became comforting instead. She loved the vast sky, the way you could see weather systems approaching from miles away. She loved the quiet, broken only by the sound of wind in the grass and the occasional call of a bird. But more than any of that, she found herself looking forward to the time she spent with Kade. He was unlike any man she'd known in Philadelphia. He was straightforward and honest, saying what he meant without games or manipulation. He worked hard and expected others to do the same, but he was never harsh or demanding. He had a quiet sense of humor that caught her off guard sometimes, making her laugh when she least expected it. One evening in early October, about 3 weeks after Prue's arrival, Kade asked if she'd like to ride out with him the next day to see more of the ranch. "I need to check on the herd in the north pasture," he said. "It's a beautiful ride, and I thought you might like to see more of the property. If you know how to ride, that is." "I can ride a little," Prue said. "Though it's been years. My mother's family had a country house when I was young, and they kept horses. But I'm probably very rusty." "We'll take it slow," Kade promised. "I have a gentle mare that would be perfect for you." The next morning dawned clear and cool, with that sharp quality to the air that spoke of autumn settling in. After breakfast, Kade led Prue to the corral and introduced her to Daisy, a pretty chestnut mare with a white blaze and a calm disposition. It took Prue a few minutes to get comfortable in the saddle again, but Kade was patient, adjusting her stirrups and making sure she felt secure. They rode out across the grassland, Kade on his big bay gelding and Prue on Daisy. The mare lived up to her reputation, responding easily to Prue's uncertain guidance and never doing anything unexpected. As they traveled north, Kade pointed out various features of his land: the creek that provided water year-round, the grove of cottonwoods where he'd built a small shelter for cattle to use in bad weather, the high point where you could see for miles in every direction. They found the cattle grazing peacefully, the calves that had been born in the spring now half-grown and sturdy. Kade rode among them, checking for any signs of injury or illness, but everything looked good. They stopped for lunch near the creek, sitting on the bank and eating the sandwiches and apples Prue had packed. "This land is beautiful," Prue said, looking around at the rolling hills and the mountains in the distance. "I understand why you love it. It gets in your blood," Kade agreed. "My father used to say that once you've spent time out here, really spent time with the land and the animals and the sky, you can never be happy cooped up in a city again." "I think he was right," Prue said. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I'm happy here, Kade. Happier than I've been in a long time. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Kade turned to look at her, and there was something in his expression that made Prue's heart skip. I'm glad you're here, he said quietly. The house feels different now, warmer somehow. Like it's a home again, instead of just a place to sleep between workdays. They held each other's gaze for a long moment, and Prue felt something shift between them. Some invisible line being crossed. She knew she should look away, should remind them both that this was an employment arrangement and nothing more, but she didn't want to. She'd been trying not to acknowledge the growing feelings she had for Kade, the way her heart lifted when he smiled at her, the way she found herself listening for his footsteps in the morning. But sitting here beside the creek with the autumn sun warm on her face and Kade looking at her like she was something precious, she couldn't deny it anymore. Kade, she started, not sure what she was going to say. But before she could continue, the sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. They both turned to see a rider approaching fast. As the figure got closer, Prue recognized Eli Peterson. He pulled his horse to a stop near them, the animal breathing hard from the run. Kade, we've got trouble, Eli said urgently. There's a fence down in the east section, and about 20 head of cattle have wandered onto the Carmichael property. Tom sent his son over to let us know. We need to get them back before they damage his crops. Kade was on his feet immediately. How long ago did they get through? Can't be more than a couple hours. Tom's men have been keeping them away from the planted fields, but they're getting antsy. All right, Kade turned to Prue. I need to go deal with this. Can you ride back to the house on your own? Just follow the creek south and you'll see the buildings. Of course, Prue said, though she felt a pang of disappointment. Whatever moment they'd been having was clearly over. Go. Do what you need to do. Kade looked like he wanted to say something more, but Eli was already turning his horse. I'll see you tonight, Kade said, and then he was mounting up and riding off with Eli, the two horses quickly disappearing over a rise. Prue rode back to the ranch slowly, giving herself time to think. What was happening between her and Kade? When had this stopped being simply an employment arrangement and started being something more? And more importantly, what was she going to do about it? She had told herself when she arrived that she wasn't looking for romance, that all she wanted was safety and a chance to rebuild her life. And that had been true at first, but somewhere along the way Kade had become more than just her employer. He'd become a friend, a companion, someone she looked forward to seeing every day. And now, she was forced to admit, he'd become someone she cared for deeply. But was it wise to pursue those feelings? She'd only been here 3 weeks. She barely knew him, really, even though it felt like she'd known him much longer. And what if she was wrong about him? What if she was just projecting what she wanted to see because she was grateful to him for helping her? She'd almost made a terrible mistake once, nearly married Gerald Thornton because it seemed like the practical thing to do. She didn't want to make another mistake, different but equally damaging. By the time she reached the ranch house and unsaddled Daisy, Prue had decided to be cautious. She would continue as she had been, doing her work and being Kade's friend, but she wouldn't let herself get carried away by feelings that might be nothing more than gratitude and proximity. That resolution lasted until Kade came home late that evening, exhausted and dirty from hours of working to round up the escaped cattle and repair the fence. Prue had kept dinner warm for him, and she served it while he cleaned up. When he sat down at the table, he gave her a tired smile that made her heart turn over. "Thank you," he said. "This smells amazing, and I'm starving." "Did you get all the cattle back?" Prue asked, sitting across from him with a cup of tea. "Every last one, and the fences repaired. It was probably brought down by that windstorm we had a few days ago. I should have checked it sooner." He ate in silence for a few minutes, then looked up at her. "I'm sorry our ride got cut short. It's all right. That's ranch life. I'm learning. Emergencies happen." "They do," Kade agreed. "But I was enjoying our conversation. I felt like we were getting somewhere." Prue's heart started beating faster. Getting somewhere? Kade put down his fork and met her eyes. "Prue, I think you know that my feelings for you have become more than just employer to employee. I've been trying not to let it show because I didn't want to make you uncomfortable or feel pressured. You came here for safety and a job, and I want you to have those things regardless of anything else. But I can't pretend anymore that I don't care about you." Prue felt like all the air had left the room. "Kade, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he said quickly. "I'm not asking for anything from you. I just wanted to be honest. If you don't feel the same way, that's fine. Nothing has to change. You'll still have your job and your room and everything I promised you. That's not it, Prue said. I do have feelings for you. I've been trying not to, but I do. You're kind and honest and hardworking, and being with you makes me happy in a way I haven't been happy in years. But I'm scared, Kade. I'm scared that I'm feeling this way because you saved me, because I was desperate and you helped me. I'm scared that these feelings aren't real or that they won't last, and I'm scared of making another mistake. Kade reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. I understand, he said, and I don't want to rush you into anything. We can take this as slow as you need. We can just see where things go, no pressure, no expectations. You really mean that? Prue asked. I really mean that. You're safe here, Prue, whether we're just friends or something more. That doesn't change. Prue felt tears prickling at her eyes, but they were good tears this time. She turned her hand in his and squeezed. Then let's see where things go. Over the next several weeks, their relationship shifted and deepened. They were careful with each other, both aware that what they were building was fragile and needed time to grow strong. But there were small moments that felt significant. Hands brushing when they passed each other in the kitchen, longer conversations on the porch in the evenings, the way Kade started bringing her wildflowers he found while working, the way Prue started making Cade's favorite foods without him having to ask. Martha Carmichael came to visit in late October, bringing her daughter Sarah, who was 19 and full of energy and questions. Martha was a warm, motherly woman in her 40s who immediately took Prue under her wing. It's so good to have another woman nearby, Martha said as they sat in Prue's kitchen drinking tea. I've been telling Tom for years that we need more neighbors. This country's too big to be so spread out. I'm still getting used to it, Prue admitted. But I love it here. Cade's been very good to me. Martha gave her a knowing look. Has he now? That boy is a good man, just like his father was. He's had a lonely time of it since his parents passed. We're just friends, Prue said, though she could feel herself blushing. Of course you are, Martha said with a smile that suggested she didn't believe that for a second. But if you ever were more than friends, well, you could do a lot worse than Kade Weston. The first snow came in mid-November, a light dusting that melted by afternoon, but signaled the changing season. Prue and Kade spent more time indoors now, and on long winter evenings, they sat by the fireplace and talked. Kade taught her to play chess, and she taught him some card games her mother had shown her. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, Prue mending or knitting, while Kade read or worked on tack repairs. One evening in early December, as they sat by the fire, Kade said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Prue said, looking up from the socks she was darning. "Do you ever regret leaving Philadelphia? Do you ever wish you'd stayed and married the Thornton fellow?" Prue shook her head firmly. "Not even for a second. I think about my father sometimes. Wish I could have said goodbye properly. I think about the house I grew up in and some of the things I had to leave behind. But I've never regretted my decision to leave." "Not even on the hard days?" Kade asked. "There have been some hard days, I know. The work isn't always easy." "The work is honest," Prue said, "and I'm proud of what I do here. I'm proud of the garden I've started, of the preserves I put up for winter, of the way this house feels like a real home now. I wake up every morning grateful to be here." Kade set down the book he'd been holding. "I'm grateful you're here too. You've changed everything for me, Prue. This house, this life, it all means more now than it did before." He moved from his chair to sit beside her on the sofa, close but not touching. "I know we said we'd take things slow, and I meant that. But I want you to know that my feelings haven't changed. If anything, they've gotten stronger. I care about you deeply, Prue. I think I might be falling in love with you." Prue's breath caught. She set down her mending and turned to face him fully. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she said softly. "Actually, I don't think it. I know it. I love you, Kade. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you make me feel safe. I love the life we're building here." Kade reached up and cupped her face gently in his hand. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Prue whispered. His kiss was soft and sweet, tentative at first, and then deeper as she responded. It felt right in a way nothing else in Prue's life had felt right in a long time. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Kade admitted. "So have I," Prue said. They spent the rest of the evening on the sofa, Prue leaning against Cade's chest while he held her, both of them watching the fire burn down to embers. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. Their relationship blossomed through the winter months. They were still careful to maintain some propriety. Prue still had her own bedroom, and they were mindful of appearances when Jake and Eli or the Carmichaels visited. But everyone could see that they were courting, and the general consensus seemed to be approval. "About time that boy found someone," Jake said one day in January when Cade was out of earshot. "He's been alone too long." Christmas was a simple affair, but joyful. Cade gave Prue a beautiful shawl he'd bought from a woman in town who wove them, soft wool dyed a deep blue. Prue gave Cade a shirt she'd made for him, carefully stitched and fitted to his measurements. They spent the day quietly, just the two of them, cooking a special meal and enjoying each other's company. In February, Cade took Prue into Loveland to attend a town dance. It was her first real social event since arriving in Colorado, and she was nervous about meeting so many people at once. But Cade stayed by her side, introducing her to everyone and making sure she felt comfortable. The whole town seemed to have turned out for the dance, which was held in the church hall. There was a small band playing fiddle music, and couples of all ages filled the floor. Cade wasn't a graceful dancer, but he was enthusiastic, and Prue found herself laughing as he spun her around the floor. Between dances, people came up to introduce themselves or to chat. Everyone was friendly and welcoming, and by the end of the evening, Prue felt like she was truly becoming part of the community. On the way home, driving the wagon under a sky full of stars, Cade said, "I have something I want to ask you." Prue looked at him, her heart suddenly beating faster. "What is it?" Cade pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her. "I know it's only been 5 months since you came to Colorado. I know we agreed to take things slow. But I can't imagine my life without you anymore, Prue. I wake up every morning grateful that you're here, and I go to bed every night hoping you'll still be here tomorrow. I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, Prue saw a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "It was my grandmother's," Cade said. "My mother gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for when I found the right woman. Prue Harper, will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Prue's face, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Cade slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, and Prue thought her heart might burst from happiness. 5 months ago, she'd been sitting at a train station with nothing but an empty bag and fear of the future. Now she had a home, a purpose, and a man who loved her for exactly who she was. They set the wedding date for April, wanting to wait until the worst of winter had passed and the spring was beginning. Martha Carmichael insisted on helping Prue make her wedding dress, and the two women spent many hours together sewing. Sarah Carmichael was going to be Prue's bridesmaid, and Eli Peterson agreed to stand up with Cade. The wedding was held at the small church in Loveland on a beautiful April morning in 1883. Prue wore her dress, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Cade had picked for her that morning. Cade wore a new suit he'd bought specially for the occasion. And when Prue walked down the aisle toward him, the look in his eyes made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The ceremony was short and sweet, the preacher speaking about love and commitment and partnership. When it came time for them to exchange vows, both Prue and Cade spoke clearly and firmly, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss sealed a promise that both of them intended to keep forever. The whole town turned out for the reception, which was held at the church hall. There was food and music and dancing, and everyone congratulated the newlyweds. Jake Peterson made a toast that had everyone laughing, and Martha Carmichael cried happy tears. Eli Peterson looked a little wistful, but he was genuinely happy for them. Finally, as the sun was setting, Cade and Prue were able to slip away. They rode back to the ranch together, to the house that was now truly their home. Cade carried Prue over the threshold, both of them laughing, and they spent their first night as husband and wife in the big bedroom that had belonged to Cade's parents, a room that now belonged to them. The next few years were the happiest of Prue's life. She and Cade worked the ranch together, building it into an even more successful operation. The garden flourished under Prue's care, and she became known in the area for her preserves and baked goods. Cade expanded the herd and improved the bloodlines, and the Weston Ranch became one of the most respected in the region. They weren't without challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers. There were times when money was tight and times when they had to work from dawn to dusk just to keep everything running. But they faced every challenge together, and that made all the difference. In the spring of 1884, Prue discovered she was pregnant. Kade was overjoyed, his excitement infectious even though Prue was nervous about becoming a mother. Martha Carmichael was a godsend during the pregnancy, visiting often and sharing her wisdom from raising her own 4 children. Their son was born in December of 1884, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Samuel, after Kade's father. Kade was a devoted father from the very first moment, holding Samuel with wonder and promising to teach him everything about ranching and honor and being a good man. Prue took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. It was exhausting and sometimes overwhelming, but watching Kade with their son, seeing the gentleness in his rough rancher's hands as he held Samuel, made every sleepless night worth it. When Samuel was 2, Prue got pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter they named Ellen, after Prue's mother. Ellen was a spirited baby who rarely cried, but always seemed to be plotting something with her bright, curious eyes. Kade doted on her shamelessly, and Prue often joked that their daughter had him wrapped around her little finger. The Weston family grew along with the ranch. Jake Peterson eventually retired, and Eli took over helping Kade full-time. Eli married a woman from Denver named Catherine, and they settled on the property his father had owned. The Carmichaels remained close friends, and their children and the Weston children grew up together, running wild across the prairie and learning the ways of ranch life. In 1888, when Samuel was 4 and Ellen was 2, Prue received a letter that had been forwarded through several addresses before finally reaching her. It was from a lawyer in Philadelphia, informing her that Gerald Thornton had died. Apparently, he'd drunk himself to death 2 years prior. The lawyer was writing to inform her that there were no longer any debts associated with her father's estate, and that if she wanted to claim what little remained, she was entitled to do so. Prue read the letter while sitting at the kitchen table, and when Kade came in from working and found her there, he immediately knew something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked, concern in his voice. Prue handed him the letter. He read it quickly, then sat down beside her. "How do you feel about this?" "Relieved," Prue said honestly. "I haven't thought about Gerald Thornton in years, but knowing he's gone, knowing he can never come looking for me, that's a relief. And I don't want anything from my father's estate. That life is gone. This is my life now, here with you and our children." Kade pulled her into his arms. "I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you got on that train and came to Loveland." "So am I," Prue said, holding him tight. "So am I." More years passed in a gentle rhythm of seasons and work and love. Samuel grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved working with his father and the cattle. Ellen was clever and fearless, always climbing things she shouldn't and asking questions that made the adults laugh. In 1890, Prue gave birth to twin boys, Jacob and Thomas, named after Jake Peterson and Tom Carmichael. The twins were identical and mischievous, keeping everyone on their toes. The ranch prospered. Kade's careful management and hard work paid off, and they were able to buy more land, expand the herd, and hire additional help. The house was expanded too, with an addition that included a proper dining room and 2 more bedrooms for the growing family. Prue became an important figure in the community. She helped establish a school in Loveland so the ranch children wouldn't have to travel so far for education. She organized fundraisers for families in need and welcomed every newcomer to the area with the same kindness Kade had shown her. She never forgot what it was like to arrive in a strange place with nothing, and she made sure no one else had to feel that kind of desperation if she could help it. On their 10th wedding anniversary in April of 1893, Kade surprised Prue with a trip to Denver. It was the first time they'd been away from the ranch and the children together since their wedding, and it felt like an adventure. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate at restaurants, and walked the city streets hand in hand. But despite the excitement of the city, both of them were eager to get home to their children and their ranch. "I never thought I'd say this," Prue said as they rode the train back to Loveland, "but I prefer the quiet of the prairie to all this noise and bustle." Kade squeezed her hand. "My father was right. Once this land gets in your blood, you can't ever really leave it." "I don't want to leave it," Prue said. "Everything I love is there." By the late 1890s, the Weston children were growing up. Samuel was a responsible 15-year-old who who already worked alongside his father like a grown man. Ellen, at 13, was as horse-crazy as she'd always been, and could outride most of the ranch hands. The twins were energetic 10-year-olds who still got into trouble regularly, but were good boys at heart. Prue looked at her life and marveled at how much had changed since that September day in 1882, when she'd sat at the train station with an empty bag and no idea what her future held. She'd found not just a place to stay, but a home. She'd found not just employment, but a purpose. And most importantly, she'd found love with a good man who cherished her every day. One evening in the summer of 1899, Prue and Kade sat on their front porch watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times over the years. Their children were all inside, Samuel teaching the twins some math, while Ellen practiced the piano that Kade had bought her for her birthday. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Kade asked. "When I found you at the station?" "Sometimes," Prue said. "I think about how scared I was, how lost I felt. And then I think about how brave you were to offer to help a complete stranger." "I wasn't brave," Kade said. "I was just doing what felt right, and I got the best deal of my life out of it." Prue laughed and leaned her head on his shoulder. "We both did." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing and the sound of the wind in the grass. Inside, Ellen hit a wrong note on the piano and then started the song over with determination. "I love you," Kade said quietly. "Just as much today as I did the day we got married. More, maybe, because now I know what a gift it is to build a life with someone." "I love you too," Prue said. "Thank you for giving me a chance when I needed one. Thank you for being patient with me, for letting me learn to trust again. Thank you for this life." Kade kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for taking that chance, for getting on that train and coming all the way to Colorado, for staying even when you could have left." "I could never leave," Prue said. "This is where I belong, with you, with our children, on this land. This is home." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear, they went inside together, to the warm house filled with the sounds of their children, to the life they'd built together from an empty bag and an offer of kindness. It was a good life, a full life, a life neither of them would have changed for anything in the world. The years continued to roll forward with their steady rhythm of seasons and work and growth. By 1902, Samuel was 20 and had taken on even more responsibility at the ranch. He'd started courting the daughter of a rancher from the next county over, a sensible young woman named Margaret, who Prue liked immediately. Ellen at 18 had her mother's independent spirit and her father's love of the land. She'd shocked everyone by declaring she wanted to be a veterinarian, an unusual ambition for a woman, but Kade and Prue supported her dream and were making plans to send her to school in Fort Collins. The twins, Jacob and Thomas, were 16 and had finally settled down from their wildest years. Jacob showed promise as a horseman and wanted to focus on breeding quality horses to supplement the ranch's cattle operation. Thomas had inherited his mother's head for numbers and was already helping manage the ranch's accounts and business dealings. In the spring of 1903, Samuel married Margaret in a ceremony that reminded Prue of her own wedding 20 years earlier. Watching her oldest son pledge his life to the woman he loved, Prue felt the passage of time like a physical thing. How had so many years passed so quickly? How had the tiny baby she'd held in her arms become this strong, capable man? "They grow up fast, don't they?" Kade whispered to her during the ceremony, as if reading her thoughts. "Too fast," Prue whispered back, though she was smiling through her tears. Samuel and Margaret built a house on the eastern section of the Weston property, expanding the family ranch into something that could support multiple generations. It was everything Kade's parents had dreamed of when they first settled this land, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Ellen left for school in the fall of 1903, and though Prue missed her daughter terribly, she was proud beyond words. Ellen wrote long letters describing her studies, her excitement at learning about animal medicine, and the few other women who shared her ambitions. She came home for Christmas and summer breaks, full of new knowledge and ideas about how to better care for the ranch animals. The twins graduated from the school Prue had helped establish and began working full-time on the ranch, taking on adult responsibilities. Jacob started a breeding program with some mares Kade helped him select, focusing on creating horses that were both sturdy enough for ranch work and elegant enough to sell to city buyers. Thomas set up a proper office in the house and began keeping meticulous records of every aspect of the ranch's operations. By 1905, Samuel and Margaret had given Prue and Kade their first grandchild, a boy they named Kade after his grandfather. Holding that tiny baby, Prue felt the circle of life complete itself in the most beautiful way. She thought about the young woman she'd been at 22, sitting at a train station with nothing but fear and determination. She never could have imagined this future, this fullness of life and love. "Are you crying, Grandma?" Samuel teased gently when he caught Prue wiping her eyes while holding baby Kade. "Happy tears," Prue assured him. "Just happy tears." In 1907, Ellen graduated from veterinary school, one of only a handful of women to do so. She returned to Loveland and set up a practice, becoming the first female veterinarian in the region. She faced some skepticism at first, but her skill and her family's reputation quickly won people over. Within a year, she was the most sought-after animal doctor in 3 counties. Ellen married in 1908, a veterinarian colleague she'd met at school named Daniel Foster. Daniel moved to Loveland to join Ellen's practice, and they built a house in town. Their wedding was a joyful affair, and Prue felt grateful that all her children had found love and happiness. The twins married within a year of each other, Jacob to a rancher's daughter named Anna, and Thomas to a school teacher named Rachel. Both couples built homes on the Weston property, and the ranch became a small family compound, multiple generations working together toward common goals. As Prue entered her 50s, she found herself taking on the role of family matriarch. She was grandmother to a growing number of grandchildren, advisor to her adult children, and still the heart of the main ranch house where she and Kade lived. The house that had once seemed so empty when she first arrived was now constantly full of people, children running in and out, family dinners that required 2 tables to seat everyone, holidays that were chaotic and joyful. In 1912, on a warm May evening, Prue and Kade celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party that seemed to include half the county. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to honor them, sharing stories and raising toasts. Jake Peterson, now elderly but still sharp-witted, gave a speech about how he'd known from the first day that Kade and Prue were meant to be together. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Prue and Kade found themselves back on their front porch, in the same spot where they'd spent so many evenings over the years. They were older now, both in their 50s, showing the years of hard work in their weathered faces and calloused hands. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who'd fallen in love 30 years earlier. 30 years, Kade mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I saw you sitting at that train station. Other times it feels like you've always been here, like I can't remember what life was like before you. "I can remember," Prue said. "I remember being lost and scared and feeling like I'd never be happy again. And then you offered me a place to stay, and everything changed." "Best decision I ever made," Kade said, taking her hand. His hand was spotted with age now, the knuckles slightly swollen from arthritis, but his grip was still strong. "Best decision I ever made was accepting your offer," Prue countered. "I could have said no. I could have been too proud or too scared. But I said yes, and that yes led to all of this." She gestured at the ranch, at the houses scattered across the property where their children lived, at the land that had become their legacy. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd stayed in Philadelphia?" Kade asked. "If you'd married that Thornton fellow?" Prue shuddered. "Sometimes, in nightmares. But then I wake up and you're beside me, and I remember that I chose a different path. I chose freedom and uncertainty and hope, and it led me here, to you, to our children and grandchildren, to this life I love so much." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars come out. From one of the nearby houses, they could hear a baby crying and then being soothed. From another, the sound of voices and laughter. The ranch was alive with family, with the next generation already growing and learning and preparing to carry on the Weston legacy. "I'm so proud of our children," Prue said. "They've all grown into such good people, kind and hard-working and honorable, just like their father." "Just like both their parents," Kade corrected. "You taught them just as much as I did. You taught them about compassion and perseverance and the importance of community. Everything good about them comes from both of us." "Everything good about them comes from love," Prue said. "We loved them, and we loved each other, and we showed them what a good marriage looks like. That's the best gift we could have given them." As they prepared for bed that night, moving through the familiar routine they'd perfected over 3 decades of marriage, Prue thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain of losing her parents, the fear of nearly being trapped in a terrible marriage, the desperate courage it had taken to board that train with nothing but an empty bag. All of it had been necessary to lead her to this moment, to this life, to this love. "Thank you," she said to Kade as they lay in bed, his arm around her shoulders in the way that had become their customary sleeping position. "For what?" he asked sleepily. "For seeing me that day at the station. For not just walking past like anyone else would have. For taking a chance on a stranger with an empty bag and a desperate story." Kade kissed her forehead. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, for trusting me enough to come to this ranch with a man you just met, for staying when you could have left, for building this life with me." "I love you," Prue said, "just as much as I did 30 years ago. More, actually, because now I know every part of you, and I love all of it." "I love you too," Kade said. "Always have, always will." They drifted off to sleep in the house that had become a home, surrounded by family and legacy and love. Outside, the Colorado night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant against the darkness. The ranch slept peacefully, cattle in the pastures, horses in the corrals, the land quiet and content under the watchful sky. The years that followed were gentle ones. Kade and Prue gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, letting Samuel and the twins take over more of the work. They spent their time with their grandchildren, passing down stories and wisdom, and teaching the youngest generation about the land they would one day inherit. By 1920, as they approached their 40th wedding anniversary, Kade and Prue were in their 60s, officially elderly by the standards of the time, though both were still active and healthy. They had 8 grandchildren now, with 2 more on the way, and the ranch had grown to over 3,000 acres supporting multiple family households. Ellen's veterinary practice had expanded to include 2 additional veterinarians working under her, and she'd published several papers on cattle diseases that were being read by veterinarians across the West. Samuel had become one of the most respected ranchers in Colorado, known for his fair dealings and the quality of his livestock. The twins' ventures, Jacob's horse breeding program, and Thomas's business management had both been hugely successful and added significant income to the ranch's operation. On their 40th anniversary, Prue and Kade took a ride out to the north pasture, to the spot by the creek where Kade had proposed so many years ago. It took them longer to ride there than it once had, and they had to stop to rest more often, but they made it. Sitting by the creek, listening to the water burble over the rocks, they held hands and reflected on their life together. 40 years, Prue said wonderingly. "How is that possible? Where did all that time go?" "Into love," Kade said simply. "Into building something good and lasting. Into raising children and working this land and being together every single day. That's where the time went." "I wouldn't change a single moment," Prue said. "Well, maybe a few of the harder moments. But even those taught us something, brought us closer together. Remember the year of the drought," Kade said. 1891, when we thought we might lose everything. I remember. We had to sell half the herd just to keep the ranch afloat. But we worked together, figured out a solution, and we came through it stronger. And the winter of 1896, when the twins both got sick with pneumonia and we thought we might lose them. Prue shuddered at the memory. That was the worst time of my life, but they survived, and it taught me not to take a single day for granted. Every day with the people you love is a gift. That's the truth. Kade agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want you to know that if I could go back and live my life over again, I wouldn't change anything. Not one single thing, because it all led me to you, and you're the best thing that ever happened to me." Prue felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, too. You saved my life that day at the train station, Kade. Not just by giving me a place to stay, but by showing me that I was worth saving. By loving me when I didn't think I deserved to be loved. By building a life with me that exceeded every dream I'd ever had." They kissed, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 40 years of love and commitment and partnership. Around them, the Colorado landscape stretched out in every direction, the land they'd worked and loved and passed on to their children. The sun was warm on their faces, the creek made its gentle music, and somewhere in the distance they could hear cattle calling to each other. "Should we head back?" Kade asked eventually. The family will be gathering for dinner soon. In a minute, Prue said. Let's just sit here a little longer. I want to remember this moment, this feeling of peace and contentment and complete happiness. So they sat by the creek, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built a life together that would echo through generations. The young woman with an empty bag and the cowboy who offered her a place to stay had become grandparents and ranchers and pillars of their community. But more importantly, they'd become partners in the truest sense of the word, two halves of a whole that was greater than either could have been alone. When they finally rode back to the ranch house, they found their entire family gathered to celebrate their anniversary. The children and grandchildren had prepared a feast, and the house was decorated with wildflowers and banners. There were speeches and toasts and a cake that Ellen had somehow managed to bake despite her busy schedule. The grandchildren performed a play they had written about the day Kade and Prue met, which had everyone laughing and crying at the same time. As the evening wound down and the younger children were put to bed, the adult children gathered with Kade and Prue on the porch. Samuel raised his glass one more time. "To my parents," he said, "who taught us everything important about life, how to work hard, how to love deeply, how to build something that lasts. Everything we have, everything we are, comes from your example. Thank you for 40 years of showing us what a good marriage looks like." "To Kade and Prue," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Prue looked around at her children and their spouses, all of them healthy and happy and settled in lives they had chosen. She thought about the grandchildren sleeping inside, the next generation who would carry the Weston name forward. She thought about the ranch, thriving and successful after 4 decades of hard work. And most of all, she thought about the man beside her, the cowboy who'd offered her a place to stay and ended up giving her everything. "Thank you," she said to all of them, "for being here, for being who you are, for making our lives so full and rich. Your father and I are so proud of all of you." As the night deepened and the stars came out, the family gradually dispersed to their own homes. Finally, it was just Kade and Prue again, alone on the porch, as they'd been so many times over the years. "A good day," Kade said, his arm around Prue's shoulders. "The best," Prue agreed, leaning into his warmth. "Though every day with you has been good, Kade, even the hard ones, because we faced them together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights go out in the houses across the ranch property one by one. The night was peaceful, filled with the familiar sounds of the ranch settling down for sleep. Somewhere an owl hooted, and in the distance a coyote howled at the moon. "I love you, Prue Weston," Kade said. "Today, tomorrow, and always." "I love you too, Kade Weston," Prue replied. "Thank you for finding me at that train station. Thank you for offering me a place to stay. Thank you for giving me a home, a family, a life worth living." "Thank you for saying yes," Kade said simply. They went inside together, to the house that had witnessed their entire marriage, to the bed they'd shared for 40 years. And as they fell asleep in each other's arms, both of them knew without a doubt that they were exactly where they were meant to be, with exactly the person they were meant to be with. The years continued in their steady march. Kade and Prue grew older gracefully, surrounded by family and love. They watched their grandchildren grow up and start families of their own. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1933, with the whole family gathering again to honor them. By then they were great-grandparents, the family tree spreading and growing in ways they'd never imagined. And through it all, through every season and challenge and joy, they remained partners. The young woman who'd sat at a train station with an empty bag and the cowboy who'd offered her a place to stay had built something that would last long after they were gone. A legacy of love and hard work and family that would echo through generations. A testament to the power of kindness and the miracle of finding the person you're meant to share your life with.